Chapter 26. And then there were two. After our meeting with King Marek, I insisted Serena help me with a few details before we retired for the night. I returned to the tunnels beneath the Tower of Ishal, where my quarters were made ready for me. Before going to my room, I informed Faren and a few of the local dwarven leaders, as well as some of my riders, about the plans for Gwaren and the deal I made to build the roads. I let them know that I wanted the first few yards of the road built before the end of the celebrations the next day, as proof of our willingness to get the process started. There were dwarves heading to the surface to get started before I made it to my quarters. Faren opened the door to my chambers, and I entered with a sigh as I noticed the gown that had been prepared for me. I stepped towards it and stared at it. The gown was admirable, with particular care taken so that the cut would accent my upper half with my preference of armored accents. "You'll look lovely in it, my lady," Faren said as he began to prepare my night clothes and a tea that would help me sleep. "I'm certain I will," I said wistfully as I stared at the outfit. Faren stopped what he was doing to look at me. "Princess, is everything all right?" He'd clearly sensed something was off about my tone. I shook my head lightly. "I'm fine." I turned and offered him a smile. "Just thinking about how many of these I'll wear before someone will wear one for me." "You're wondering when you'll be the one wearing a wedding dress?" Faren asked as he came to my side. I took a deep breath and thought about the question. There were so many answers to that question. I had been married. I had been so happily married in my first life, and I doubted that I could ever feel that way about anyone ever again. However, I was also no longer back on Earth, and my spouse had died 2 years before I had. I still loved her, and the thought of marrying someone else still felt like a betrayal. However, I knew that she would have wanted me to be happy. She would want me to find someone who cared for me and supported me just as she had, and she'd want that person to make me happy and work to make my goals a reality. In the end, I could only feel tears come to my eyes as I kept my smile. I don't know. I know who I want, but she died before I did. I had someone I thought might be able to make me happy, but he died at Ostagar. I'm not built to be on my own. I sniffled as I realized how true that statement was. I've been doing all of this since I was reborn, with the idea that I'd probably have to be alone for the rest of my life. I convinced myself that as long as I could make everyone else's life better, I could stand the loneliness. I could deal with it. But as I'm watching everyone I know get married, and knowing that every time I see them, I'll be the one person who's still alone. Faren's hands embraced one of mine, and he smiled. The next few moments drew on for what seemed like centuries. He spoke my name, my first name from my first life. He gave me time to register it before speaking my name again. I'm right here. I've always been right here. I stared at him wide-eyed. I could feel my tears running freely. "What? How do you? I never told you what my name was?" Faren chuckled and gave a little shrug. "I figured it out before we left for Ostagar that night we spoke about our past. I even gave you a hint later on with the inscription in your ring that we gave you for your birthday." It took me a few moments to register what he meant. When the realization hit me, the quote came out in a whisper of disbelief. "I have crossed oceans of time to find you." From Dracula. He nodded and sniffled. He was beginning to grow just as emotional as I was. "I didn't think you'd want me again. I thought that maybe you and Frandlin would be good for each other. I just wanted you to be happy." Caution gripped me for a few moments. Faren knew my name, but that could have been a lucky guess. The way he felt about me and Frandlin sounded like how my spouse would respond to the situation as well. I didn't think he would try to deceive me, but for some reason I needed to be sure. "Wait," I said desperately. "What was your first tattoo and where did you get it?" Faren stared at me perplexed for a minute before realization kicked in. "It was soot sprites gathering star candies. I got it at a convention in St. Lauderdale. You paid for it and stood there patiently the entire time." I clapped a hand to my mouth in shock. "By the stone! It is you, isn't it? Oh, you should have said something the moment you realized it." I leapt forward and hugged him tight. He wrapped his arms around me and squeezed me close. "I didn't want to make you choose." I pulled away just enough to look at him. "It never would have been a decision. I have missed you since the day you died. I just went through the motions without you. I've done everything I've done in this life because I knew it's what you would have wanted and to make the world better." "You're doing amazing," he replied, placing a hand on my cheek. I'm so proud of how you've worked to make things better. Ever since I realized who you were, I've looked back on everything in a new light, and it's only served to make me happy to have met you all over again." I gave an embarrassed huff of laughter and wiped my eyes. "Well, I hope you know you're marrying me again, right?" Faren barked out a laugh. "I don't think many people would approve of a commoner turned warrior marrying their paragon princess." "They'll approve because I approve," I responded confidently. At this point, no one would be good enough. So better the person who's dedicated 2 lifetimes to me than someone who would be a simple political match. "At this point, I'm not going to doubt you," he chuckled. We spent most of the night talking and reminiscing about both our former lives and our current life. In fact, we spent so much time talking that when we realized what time it was, we only got about an hour's worth of sleep. Triana and the others didn't notice my exhaustion. In fact, Triana and King Marich both mentioned that I seemed more exuberant and chipper than I'd ever been. Marich and I took the day moving from one celebration to another. Throughout the festivities, we discussed the details of Guarin's purchase. There were other details that needed to be considered, such as whether the humans would remain Ferelden citizens, or if they would be incorporated into the Dwarven Kingdom. I was also able to show him the first few yards of the road which had been prepared by the dwarves at Ostagar's main entrance. I explained how there would be gutters to drain the rainwaters down to underground rivers and streams which would need to be cleaned regularly. All the while, Faren followed behind me quietly. He would occasionally offer additional insight about my plans that I didn't think were particularly important at the moment, but that Marich seemed to appreciate. It was nice to realize that Faren had been continuing his role in our relationship the same way he had in our previous life this entire time. Now that I understood who he was, so many things made sense now. Just knowing who he was made life brighter somehow, and I felt a renewed sense of self and strength. Like a part of me that had been taken away was suddenly back again, and I was whole once more. Finally, the time for the actual ceremony came, and we made our way back to the center of the budding city fort. The large square had been prepared with a large raised stage so that more people could witness the union. I changed into my gown and joined Triana and Alfric on the stage with Frandlin as my escort. A few other elves were up on the stage as well, elders mostly, who would bless the union. One of the keepers brought everyone to order and spoke at length about the merging of the different Daish cultures with the cultures of the city elves, and how the joining of Triana and Alfric was more than just the joining of 2 people in matrimony, but that they represented the merging of elven cultures for the future. When he was finished speaking, he invited me to speak as a friend and loved one of the bride and groom. I stepped forward and smiled at Triana and Alfric. The 2 seemed to be blushing from joy. I took my place between them and inhaled deeply. I cannot speak of the merging of cultures as the keeper just has. I am a friend and ally of the elves, but I have not shared their history or their struggles. But I can speak to the union of Triana and Alfric, and to the hope and strength that love binds within us once we have found our life's partner. I looked between the 2 before continuing. Triana was brought to Orzammar 10 years ago in order to help keep her safe. She wasn't at all pleased about the decision, and we didn't exactly hit things off right away. But our shared love for the magic of Thedas and the good we could do for our people made us quick friends. I have fought beside her more times than I can count, and we have gone on many adventures together. I can say without a shadow of a doubt that she is my closest and dearest friend. I reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. Her friendship helped bolster me through dark and trying times as we worked to retake lost dwarven thags and prepared ourselves to stop a blight. I assisted her in the effort to unite the Dalish clans and ensure that the elves had a place to call their own. Through all of this, we remained friends. Friends help each other. We support one another. We do what is best for one another. However, as much as we'd like to do more, we cannot take the special place in someone's heart that a wife or husband can. I looked up at Alfric with a playful smirk. I liked Alfric right away when we met him in Ostagar. Well, I loved his food, and that helped me like him. There was a rumbling of laughter through the crowd. It was no secret that I gorged myself on Alfric's cooking whenever I could. However, over the 3 years we spent preparing for the blight, I watched as my best friend began spending more time with someone of her own kind. It was a strange sensation, both happy and sad to see her drift away from me and toward him. I wouldn't get to spend as much time with her as I would have liked, but I knew what she was doing was making her happy. After Ostagar, we all went our separate ways. I had to return home while Traiana and Alfric had to stay here. I admit that leaving felt like I had left a piece of my heart here with me, but I was leaving it in good hands. And how could I not think that? Look at what they've accomplished together. I spread my arms wide to encompass the fort and everyone in attendance. They worked together and supported each other as they built what was a newly refurbished fort into a budding and thriving city full of elven culture. The bond they share has brought them through darkspawn, prejudice, and even betrayal and incarceration. Throughout it all, they leaned on each other to get through. I took each of their hands and placed Triana's hand in Alfric's. With the rest of their lives ahead of them together, I can only imagine what they'll manage to accomplish together. I looked at them both in turn. I wish you both all the happiness in the world. Durin anur varag naraj vortar kazad kuzdul. The last bit were a couple of dwarvish phrases which meant that I wished they had a long and prosperous life together. The literal translation was a couple of Irish phrases combined that I had remembered which said, "May your chimney always have smoke coming from it, and may a mouse never leave your chimney with a tear in its eye." Fun little phrases that I like to drop ever so often. The rest of the ceremony was taken up by another keeper who spoke more to the religious nature and traditions of the elves. When all was said and done, those in attendance cheered for the pair and released a large numbers of birds with small seed bags attached to their legs. The seeds would fall to the ground and germinate over time, creating a field of flowers. The bags were made of plant fibers so the birds could easily remove them. I surprised Triana and Alfric with a new home that I'd molded with my powers, while everyone's attention was on the ceremony. I'd chosen an area near the center of the fort that was typically used as an open-air market. I also promised to have the dwarves craft a new market closer to the entrance so that visitors would be more inclined to visit it and spend their coin there. We stayed for another few days to help the new couple move into the house and spend some time together. By the time we were ready to go, Triana and Alfric were settled into their new home, and I was looking forward to going back home. As we were all saying our goodbyes, Alan flagged me down. "Merida!" Alan called as he jogged over to me. "Alan?" I curtsied to him with a smile. "Was there something you needed?" Alan gave a quick bow to reciprocate the courtesy. "Yes, actually. My uncle seems to have taken an interest in you. I was wondering if you would do me the favor of entering into a correspondence with him. I have a letter he's already written to you if you agree." "Your uncle?" I asked with some interest. "Malcolm Hawke," Alan clarified. "Oh, I realized that he was talking about Hawke's father from Dragon Age 2. He's interested in me? That's interesting to know. I'd be more than happy to correspond with him. As I recall, he's a rather accomplished mage." "He is indeed," Alan nodded as he fished the letter from one of the pockets inside his robe and handed it to me. When he heard about a dwarven mage, he became rather starstruck with the idea. I should expect to be asked some strangely personal, off-the-wall questions. "I'm sure it will be fine," I chucked as I took the letter. "I have some scouts with me. I'll read the letter today and pen a response this evening." "Thank you, Merida," Alan smiled. "I appreciate you taking the time to engage with him." "Don't mention it," I chuckled. "He isn't the first mage to be interested in me." I tossed Alan a playful wink before turning to climb onto my Bronto. He blushed furiously and cleared his throat. Yes. Well, thank you again, Merida. Also, I thought for the next annual meeting I could come to Orzammar with some students so they could better understand the lyrium refinement process by seeing it firsthand." Once I'd finished mounting my Bronto and took the reins, I looked down at Alan. "That sounds like a fine idea. I'll have some safety equipment prepped for them so they won't be affected by the fumes or any stray raw lyrium." "Sounds like an excellent plan." Alan bowed his head. We left soon after, and I was genuinely happy to be returning home. My guards would note that we did a good deal of singing as we rode where we would typically ride in moderate silence. My mood was elevated, and I was happier than I had been since I had been reborn, knowing that Faren was my spouse from my former life. My next goal was clear: announcing our engagement and planning the wedding. I wasn't going to let anything stand in my way,